I died in a fire started by the child my best friend adopted. And when I opened my eyes again, I was standing in the orphanage on adoption day, with a second chance to choose a different fate. In my first life, everyone said I was lucky. I adopted a little girl who grew up to be a star, rich, famous, admired by millions. My best friend Linda adopted a boy because she believed intelligence could change destiny. That boy was brilliant but withdrawn, struggling with autism, and the crushing pressure Linda put on him. When he failed his college entrance exam, something inside him broke. He set their house on fire. Linda, burned by envy and hatred, dragged me into the flames and killed me. Her last words were full of bitterness, screaming that I had stolen everything from her. Now I was alive again, standing in the same orphanage, hearing the same laughter, watching the same children run across the lawn, as if nothing terrible had ever happened. The director stood beside us on the balcony, pointing out the children below. Linda and I had grown up together, gone to the same schools, married the same year, and suffered the same pain of infertility. People used to joke that we were more like sisters than friends. I used to believe that too. But now, as I watched her face, I saw it clearly. The impatience in her eyes, the hunger, the resentment she had hidden so well in our previous life. When she ignored the boys entirely and pointed straight at the most beautiful little girl under the tree, my heart sank. That girl was Chloe. Linda had come back too. Director, I want her, Linda said, her voice sharp and decisive. Everyone was stunned. For years, Linda had talked endlessly about adopting a genius, a child who could study their way into wealth and status. Standing only a few steps away was Kevin, the boy who could solve a Rubik's Cube faster than most adults, the same boy Linda had tortured in the future. My husband glanced at me, confused. I said nothing. Linda turned toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said she knew I liked Chloe, but since nothing was finalized yet, she hoped I wouldn't mind. I smiled back and told her to go ahead. She hesitated, suspicious of how easily I gave up, then hurried off before I could change my mind. As she wrapped Chloe in her arms, I saw the little girl look back at me. Her eyes filled with fear and confusion, like she thought I had abandoned her. I forced myself not to react. I turned away and walked toward Kevin, who was standing alone, staring up at the sun like it held answers only he could see. In that moment, the choice was made. On the drive home, my husband couldn't understand why Linda had changed her mind so suddenly. I didn't explain. I remembered everything. I remembered Linda selling her house to move into a better school district. I remembered her screaming at Kevin when he ranked second instead of first, hitting him, then crying and begging him to try harder. I remembered how she mocked me for letting Chloe chase her interests instead of forcing her to study. I remembered how Kevin only smiled when Chloe was around, and how Linda tore that friendship apart out of pure control. I remembered the hospital room where Kevin handed in a blank exam paper, and the slap Linda gave him instead of help. I remembered the fire. When we arrived home, my husband awkwardly apologized to Kevin for the pink decorations in the bedroom we had prepared for a girl. Kevin didn't complain. He touched the strawberry-patterned blanket and said he liked it. I told him honestly that I wasn't a genius mother, that I couldn't teach him everything, but as long as he was safe and happy, I would stand by him no matter what. He looked at me for a long moment, eyes too calm for a 6-year-old, and softly called me Auntie Sarah, the same way he had in the past life. My heart skipped, but I told myself it was just coincidence. That night, I lay awake thinking about Chloe, wondering if there was any way to save her too. I had just asked my husband if we were crazy enough to try adopting both children when the doorbell rang. Standing outside was Chloe, alone, pale, and shaking. She said she needed to talk to Kevin. I knew then that I wasn't imagining things. The impossible had happened. Not only had I returned to the past, but both children had as well. We let Chloe into Kevin's room and closed the door, but sleep was impossible. I stood outside, heart pounding, as two children spoke in calm, measured voices that carried the weight of lives already lived. Chloe admitted she had waited until Linda fell asleep, then slipped out of the house and took a taxi, nearly ending up at a police station, because no one believed a 6-year-old should be alone that late. She said the moment she got home, Linda had already started talking about contracts, future earnings, and how Chloe would support the family. Nothing had changed. Kevin listened quietly and told her she shouldn't have come alone, that it was dangerous. Chloe answered that if Kevin had gone with Linda, he would not survive a second time. She remembered the fire, the hospital, and the way his pain was ignored until it consumed him. They spoke like survivors planning how to avoid the same battlefield. When I finally stepped into the room, neither of them looked shocked. Kevin said there was no point hiding it anymore. They both remembered everything. They had recognized each other days ago at the orphanage, and planned for me to adopt them together, never expecting Linda to return as well. Chloe's voice shook when she said Linda scared her more than anything else. She didn't want to become a tool again. Kevin said we needed to work together this time, carefully, because Linda would never let go willingly. I told them I was already part of it. I wasn't going to lose either of them again. Before dawn, Kevin and I walked Chloe back to Linda's house. The streets were quiet, the air cold, and Chloe looked painfully small as she climbed back through her bedroom window. Kevin stood across the street, staring at the building like it was a prison. His hands were clenched so tightly they trembled. I knelt beside him and told him this life was different. He wasn't powerless anymore. None of us were. When school began, Linda and I enrolled the children in the most competitive elementary school in the city. On registration day, she surrounded herself with parents and showed Chloe off like a prized possession, praising her looks and boasting about the expensive piano, ballet, and vocal lessons she had already booked. She laughed and said children were investments, and the smarter ones paid off sooner. I felt sick, listening to her. When I spoke up and said a child wasn't a business project, Linda snapped. She called Kevin strange, dark, and dangerous, saying I would regret choosing him. Something inside me broke. The argument exploded into shouting, then grabbing, then chaos. Parents screamed, children cried. Kevin and Chloe, driven by fear and anger, jumped in, biting and kicking like cornered animals until the police arrived. At the station, our husbands showed up stunned and confused. In the bathroom, Linda blocked my path and smiled. She admitted she remembered the past too. She said she would win this life, that Kevin would still become a monster, and that I would die just like before. I stayed calm and secretly recorded every word. When she finished, I splashed water in her face and walked out. The recording kept her detained for threats and harassment, while I left with Kevin. I kissed Chloe goodbye right in front of Linda, watching her eyes burn with fury. Back home, Kevin changed in ways that frightened and amazed me. Without fear crushing him, his intelligence bloomed freely. While I struggled to manage daily life, he quietly built devices from scraps, hiding cameras and microphones inside toys and music boxes. One of them ended up in Chloe's room. Through it we saw the truth of Linda's home. Chloe was dragged out of bed before sunrise, splashed with cold water, screamed at until her voice went hoarse. Linda pinched her arms, insulted her face, and reminded her constantly that love had a price. Chloe, carrying the mind of an adult, learned to fight back with cold logic, reminding Linda that injuries and illness would ruin her value. Hearing that broke me, but it kept Chloe safe. At school, Kevin's abilities became impossible to ignore. He finished exams meant for much older students in minutes. Teachers called me in repeatedly, baffled and overwhelmed, admitting they had nothing left to teach him. Word spread fast. Linda tried to humiliate us publicly, saying geniuses always turned on their parents. Kevin accidentally knocked her to the ground during an argument, and I led a group of parents in calling out her behavior until she fled, humiliated and shaking. Linda grew more desperate. She dragged Chloe across cities for non-stop photo shoots, forcing her to change clothes again and again under the blazing sun. When Chloe collapsed from heat exhaustion, Linda checked the outfits before checking her pulse. Someone filmed it. The video spread everywhere. Linda cried online, blaming her own poor childhood and claiming she only wanted a better future for her daughter. The public forgave her. Chloe's fame skyrocketed. Linda's grip tightened. But this time, we were watching everything, and we were preparing for the moment she finally crossed the line. Linda's greed didn't slow down after the wave of public sympathy. It sharpened and became more dangerous, like an animal backed into a corner. With every new endorsement Chloe landed, Linda grew more restless, more controlling, as if she were racing against time. Through the tiny devices Kevin had hidden, we watched Chloe's days stretch endlessly. She slept only a few hours a night. Before sunrise, Linda dragged her out of bed for training. After school, it was lessons, fittings, rehearsals, interviews. There was never a moment that belonged to Chloe herself. Linda spoke constantly about money, loyalty, and repayment, reminding Chloe that every meal she ate, every dress she wore, every compliment she received had a price attached. Love was never mentioned, unless it was tied to profit. Chloe endured it with terrifying calm. In front of cameras, she smiled sweetly and played the obedient daughter. Behind closed doors, she whispered plans to Kevin through the music box, her voice steady, patient, and cold. She remembered exactly how this path ended in the last life. How it stripped her of choice and joy until she barely recognized herself. This time, she was waiting for the moment when Linda's own greed would destroy her. Kevin, meanwhile, was becoming impossible to ignore. His mind moved faster than any system built to contain it. Teachers praised him at first, then grew uneasy. He questioned lesson plans, corrected textbooks, and solved problems that weren't supposed to be solvable yet. Some educators saw brilliance, others saw trouble. I was called into endless meetings where they spoke carefully about appropriate placement and emotional stability, as if intelligence itself were a threat. Kevin listened politely and said nothing. But at home, he worked. Linda heard about Kevin's reputation and reacted exactly as expected. She started spreading rumors among parents, saying Kevin was unstable, that his mind was dark, that children like him always turned violent, when that didn't isolate us enough. She changed tactics. She showed up at my house uninvited, smiling as if nothing had happened between us, suggesting Kevin might benefit from her strict guidance. She claimed I was too soft, too indulgent, and hinted that if anything went wrong, people would blame me. I closed the door without answering. That was when Kevin decided we would stop reacting and start dismantling her world piece by piece. He expanded the surveillance network far beyond what I understood, mapping Linda's finances, contracts, schedules, and private communications. He explained it to me simply. Linda's entire identity depended on being admired. As long as people believed her story, she was untouchable. Once the image cracked, everything would collapse. The first crack came from Linda's impatience. She signed Chloe to a clothing endorsement without reading the full contract, blinded by fast money and prestige. Kevin flagged the company immediately. Its owner had a long history of exploiting young girls, buried under settlements and threats. We waited, as expected. During a private meeting, the man tried to trap Chloe in his office. Because we were watching live, he arrived with security just in time. The door was forced open. The man was arrested. The story broke within hours. This time, there was no sympathy wave. People started asking hard questions. Linda panicked. She screamed at Chloe for almost ruining everything, slapped her, and locked her in her room for hours. Chloe didn't cry. She waited. Kevin released the next phase slowly, carefully, never all at once. Clips of Linda's private cruelty appeared online, spaced just far enough apart to keep the outrage alive. Her screaming, her insults, her obsession with money. Each video chipped away at the image she had spent years building. Brands began pulling out. Invitations stopped coming. Linda grew more volatile, lashing out at everyone around her. She blamed Chloe for the public turning against her, and tightened her control even further. Chloe endured it, knowing the end was close. Kevin kept digging deeper, uncovering things Linda never imagined could resurface. Old financial records, deleted messages, evidence tied to an unsolved death involving her husband's former mistress. Everything was documented, organized, and ready. The final stage was set at a major movie press conference where Chloe was scheduled to announce her first leading role. Months earlier, I had quietly invested in the project, securing just enough influence to ensure Chloe would be given the microphone. When the cameras went live, Chloe stood on stage, calm and composed, and spoke the truth. She said she acted not because she loved it, but because her mother told her she was an investment. She said she was working to pay for a future brother's medical treatments, a child who didn't even exist yet. The room erupted. At that exact moment, Kevin hijacked the screens behind her. Linda's recorded threats played. Her confession to drugging my vitamins to cause my miscarriage echoed through the hall. Evidence of murder flashed one file at a time. Police moved in before the crowd could even process what they were seeing. Linda screamed as they dragged her away, still insisting she had won. Still clinging to the idea that control meant victory. I stepped forward and silenced her with a single shock, not out of hatred, but to finally end the noise of the past. The trial that followed was swift and brutal. The evidence was overwhelming. Linda was sentenced to death. Months later, I finalized Chloe's adoption. Kevin entered a university program designed for minds like his. Chloe returned to acting on her own terms. And for the first time, our future belonged to us alone. After Linda's arrest, life didn't suddenly feel triumphant. It felt quiet, almost unnervingly so. For the first time since my rebirth, I wasn't living on edge, bracing for the next disaster. The trial moved quickly, fueled by overwhelming evidence and public anger that refused to fade. Linda sat upright in court, still clinging to dignity, still believing confidence could shield her. Her lawyers tried to paint her as a desperate mother shaped by hardship, but her own recorded voice dismantled every excuse, calm, calculating, speaking of children as assets and love as leverage. When the verdict was read, I didn't feel joy. I felt the exhaustion of someone who had finally put down a burden carried across 2 lifetimes. Chloe stayed with us throughout the proceedings, officially temporary at first. Once the pressure lifted, her body collapsed into deep, endless sleep, as if it finally felt safe enough to rest. When she woke, she asked questions that revealed how warped her world had been. Was she allowed to rest? Was it okay to say no? Would people still love her if she stopped being useful? I answered slowly, repeating that she owed no one anything. "One night," she cried quietly against my shoulder, the sound of relief more than pain. Kevin stood nearby, silent. But I could see the tension easing from his posture as well. Kevin returned to school briefly, but it was obvious he had outgrown it. Teachers tried to help, but his mind moved too far ahead. Specialists evaluated him, and soon he was offered a place in a university-linked program for exceptionally gifted students. The idea scared me. In my first life, his intelligence had destroyed him. This time, he told me he wanted to go, not to prove anything, but to understand himself. I hugged him tightly, and promised that wherever he went, he would never face the world alone again. Chloe's adoption took months, tangled in legal complications and public scrutiny. Each delay made her anxious, afraid something would still go wrong. When it was finally finalized, she didn't celebrate. She just stood there quietly, as if afraid to move. That night, she asked if she could call me Mom. I told her she never needed to ask again. She returned to acting slowly and on her own terms. She chose roles carefully, demanded rest, and walked away from opportunities that felt wrong. Some called her difficult, she called it honest. Watching her turn something that once felt like a cage into a choice was one of the quiet gifts of my second life. Before Linda's execution, I visited her once. Prison had stripped away the drama she loved. She looked smaller, older, her eyes still sharp but hollow. I showed her the travel fund I had saved years ago, back when I believed we were building a future together. I told her I had never seen her as a rival. I had believed we were friends. She broke down, asking why she was always the one left behind. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. I didn't forgive her. Forgiveness wasn't necessary. I left lighter than I entered, not because she suffered, but because I finally understood her hatred had never been about me. It had been about an emptiness she tried to fill with control. Years passed. Kevin grew into his brilliance without fear. Chloe lived freely, stumbled, loved, and chose her own path. Sometimes I thought about fate and how close everything came to repeating itself. Knowledge alone never changed destiny. Choice did, love did. And this time, we chose differently.